Welcome to Grief and Media, a podcast where we laugh, cry, feel seen in our grief, and everything in between. I'm your host, Alex Piscatelli. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Grief and Media. I am so excited for this episode. It is one that I've been thinking about for a while, but didn't know how to go about it. And so I posted on Instagram and I was like, who wants to talk about horror and about scary movies amid grief? So I'm so excited to welcome our guest today, Tae Greene. Welcome to Grief and Media. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. It's really interesting. Like, of course, have loved like following your series and podcasts. I'm just like, I have some grief. I could talk about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I'm so glad you messaged me because I feel like we were saying this before we started recording, but we've been like mutuals on Instagram and Twitter for like I don't even know how long, like probably like 5 or 6 years, honestly. Yes. This is our first time actually talking.
Yeah.
So I'm so excited. I guess sometimes I wish it were for better circumstances, not about grief. However, I think this will be a really good conversation. And we obviously love horror movies, so it'll be fun to talk about that as well.
Yeah.
Yay. Okay, so first I wanted to ask you, so you reached out to me when I posted about wanting to do this episode, and you said you had, watched horror movies amid your grief. I wanted to hear about your experience with grief and however much you're willing to share and the person that sort of brings you to this space today too.
Yeah. So, actually, I'll start off with it's interesting to like go through grief because no one really knows what death is like until you've genuinely experienced it on such a close level. And so for me, that was my grandmother. She, when I was born or even before I was even a thought, my mom, had said, hey, like, I'm like, this is what's going on. They were living in the South. My mother was in the military. And so my grandma was like, you know what, like, screw everything, screw everybody. Like, I'm going to be there to support you and this baby. And because of course with military, they go out to sea all the time. And, if you don't have someone there supporting you, you have to get out of the military. Like that is one thing that they don't tolerate is like, if you don't have a backup or a support system, you can't be in. And so throughout my life, she was like my compass. She really truly raised me. Both my parents were in the military, so it was really difficult to kind of have like that long term, like, oh yeah, like this is going on. Mom's at like different football, volleyball, whatever. It was just like they're out to sea. They're, on deployment. And so when things kind of started to happen, she had been dealing with a lot of health issues throughout the years, either, because of her work or, things like that. I mean, I remember she actually did like the Coronado Bay Bridge run, and she was in the best shape of her life. She was walking to work, which I want to say was like 2 or 3 miles. And then as time kind of went on, like, her body was just like, I can't do this anymore. And so it was the last few years, and, she had a walker. She kind of had a first scare in the hospital, or at least with her health. And, I remember my mom essentially telling me after everything had happened and was said and done, and she was like, yeah, like I kind of dealt with this. We were like bowling, and all of a sudden I get a phone call from the doctor saying, hey, like, I think she's dying and we probably need to figure this out. And I mean, my mom held it together. I had no idea that call had even occurred. And I mean, my grandma made it through. She was just like, it was just scary. It was, but then when it happened for a second time, when this is my like senior year of college, and I was, excited, kind of going through the motions, but I was like, I have senioritis. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm over it. And just started recognizing that her health was really declining. So when my mom finally came back from her last deployment, essentially, she was like, my grandmother was beyond sick. And of course, I was in college, even though I was, down the road. I didn't go home very often because I still had a full course load. I still had things that, I was committed to. And so when I had the opportunity, I would go home. Um, but received a phone call like, hey, you need to come home. Things are happening. And took her to the hospital and didn't really think a lot of it because of the previous times. And I had finals that particular
Oh.
week. And so, I remember the day before she had passed, went to the hospital. They were like, yeah, like we're going to see how she does, but, this isn't looking super great.
Hmm.
Um, and remember going home, I had like a 9 a.m. final. It was Cosmos. I hated that class. It was the
Uh-huh.
worst. And I knew as soon as I walked into that room, like I'd failed that test. It wasn't
Right.
going to work out. And immediately after, I just like went straight to the hospital, and she seemed like she was fine. She was kind
Hmm.
of on that, what they would call that last wind. And she was in good spirits. She was, whatever. And we had walked over to like some room because they had taken her back for something. And all of a sudden I hear like a code blue, and
Mm.
immediately knew. I was like, that's my grandmother. Like that is like that's her room. That's her situation. And of course, like they can't tell people like this person is coding. Like it's just thing. And so, of course, they bring her back, and they essentially grab us and they take us to this room and let us know that she was the one that had coded, and they brought her back. And essentially, that this was kind of her last day.
Hmm.
And, of course, we're just like, we're an emotional wreck at this point because the glue that kept the family together, even outside of our like immediate family. So like her brothers and sisters, her cousins, her friends, like she was the one that like kept everyone together. We're trying to talk through like what are we going to do? What do we need from her? What are some of our last words to her? And it we had stayed in the hospital for a couple of hours, and finally we were like, you know what? Seems like things are stabilizing enough for us to be able to come like go home, and then we'll just go back. And left the hospital, got taken back to my apartment, my dorm, and probably within 10 minutes my mom was like, nope, no, 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 we have to go back to the hospital, this is it.
Right.
And I just remember like I'm just shaking, crying, like trying to like figure all this out because of course like I had never really dealt with death. I mean, that just feeling so sick with like that pre-grief that like I'm going to have to approach this and I don't know what's going to happen. And so, finally got to the hospital. She's all hooked up to all these machines, and, she's able to kind of like almost fight through her tubing to like say her last few words. And
Right.
yeah, it was a very haunting scene, I would say. It very vivid, at least in my memory, of her squeezing my hand and like fighting through the tube, saying, I love you, I love you. And I think we left the room for like maybe an hour or two, came back, and that was it.
Right.
And, my mom, we got escorted out, and my mom is just like on the ground, like crying. And it was so weird to see like even the nurses and the doctors like this is kind of our everyday. And I'm like, that's
Right.
so depressing.
Right.
But they were just so unfazed, and I was almost hurt by that. I was like, this is like a human that like has raised me, has poured life into me, has supported me through all kinds of things. And your thing is like, all right, like we're shutting these machines down, and we're getting her prepared for the next stage. And um, ended up going home, and that's kind of when everything hit. And of course, we're in this grieving period. It's like December 12th 14th ish time frame, so it's like before Christmas. We
Right.
don't want to celebrate Christmas. I don't even think we set up a tree. We barely bought presents. And we were just like, you know what, we were here together, that's enough, I guess. Of course, had family fly out, did the whole funeral, And I mean, it was a beautiful funeral, but at the same time, it was still very like surreal.
Right.
And once everything had finally blown over, and you know, I don't want to say like blown over, but once everything had kind of settled, then the military kind of came back and said, "Hey, we know you lost your mom, but we need you to go to your next duty station, which is in Washington."
Oh my
And
gosh.
my mom had just bought a house, so it was just like, "Hey, Tayshawn, I know you were literally in your last semester of college, but you need to move home. You need to take care of your brother, and you need to take care of the house while still having a full course load and everything else that you've been doing." And so, I mean, from that moment on, my body was on autopilot. I did not have a serious break until I had graduated. And then at that point, my body had just collapsed. Like I had gotten so sick. And there was nothing I could do about it because, you know, for the military, once you graduate from whatever higher ed institution, your insurance stops there. And
Right.
so I was just like, one, I don't want to go to the hospital because I had literally just had a traumatic experience there.
Right.
Um, but then also like the next person that I would depend on is not here. And you know, I had to really sit with myself in a lot of different situations. Um, and I just, you know, through the summer, you know, at least post grad, I was looking for a job. I didn't know what I was doing. You know, I was watching my little brother, you know, having people ping me left and right, like, "Hey, hope you're doing all right. Just checking in on you." And actually, to dial it back, I just want to say I genuinely hate it when people are like, "So sorry for your loss," because it's like you didn't do anything. They just
Yes.
like,
I don't know what's funny. There's so many like words people say, and it's like, I agree with you. It's like, I also, sorry, this is a total side note, but that made me think I hate when people are like, oh, your parents would be, or your grandma would be proud of
oh,
you. Like when someone says that, it's just I just hate, yeah, I hate all the
like
different like words people say. It's like, just say, I'm here for you. Like, I
yeah,
feel like that's all we need.
like literally, you wouldn't even have to say anything. Just show up at my door and just sit on the couch with me. Like that is
Yes.
genuinely enough. But there were so many, like, especially in that first couple weeks, I just got text messages from everyone. And like, mind you, I'm like a chronically online human being. Like, I'm always on
Oh,
my phone. I'm always on social media. Like, that's my job. That's what I have to do. And so for me, I'm like, oh yeah. But for that period of time, I had to turn off my phone. I could not
right.
answer text messages. I could not answer calls. No Facebook. It was like, I have to literally sit with this. There's nothing that I can do to bring my grandmother back. And it got to a point where, you know, of course, then the military thing happened and school happened. And I think that ended up pushing out my grieving process and period.
Right.
Because I mean, I got back to school and of course I had to tell all my professors, like, "Hey, here's the deal. This is what happened to me over the winter break. I'm going to have to take a step back. I am probably I'm going to probably struggle through this last semester. Give me grace. I will try as hard as I can. I will do what needs to be done to graduate, but know that I am not going to be at the same energy level that you've seen through the year or through the years
Right.
rather."
Did you find people to be understanding at that time when you
Oh,
were open
extremely.
about what was going on? Okay, that's
It
good.
was very strange to kind of get some people, I will say some people didn't get it.
Yeah.
And those instances are also burned into the back of my brain of just like, oh my gosh. But I had other moments where people were just really weird and really shitty about the situation. You know, the day after everything had happened, my mom got my brother and I out of the house, and we had done like a double feature, which was kind of weird.
Mhm.
But we went to go see like Aquaman in theaters. Mind you, I hate Aquaman. Like that is probably the worst superheroes, and we just went to go watch. And I was like, I don't really like this, but we're a family, we're together. And we ended up watching the animated Spider-Man, you know, Back to the
Uh-huh.
Spider-Verse or something like that.
Yeah.
And this is when Sunflower was a very, very popular song.
Mhm.
And of course, like all of like anything, any piece of media that I had hit in that moment had kind of stuck with me in that moment. And so for whatever reason, everyone liked that song. And it continued to stay on the charts for months and
Right.
months. And so my friend and roommate at the time was playing this, it was playing Sunflower in his car. And I was like, hey, like, this actually is a little triggering for me. Like, can you change the
Hmm.
song? And he wouldn't change the song. And it got to the point where I like, oh, I almost had to fight him because I was just like, this is literally is, I'm going to cry. Like, this is
Right.
a lot that's going on. Like, obviously, this is still very fresh. Maybe you haven't really dealt with death in that kind of way, but like, at like anything at this point is just, it feels so heavy and raw. And I mean, even to this day, like, I love that song. It's a beautiful song. I can't listen to it.
Yeah.
And I love that movie. Like, it's a great movie. But I can't listen to that song. I can't listen to Happier by um
Marshmallow or whatever.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that song. We were like we
Right.
were pulling up to um the funeral home, and I was reading her obituary, and that song was playing. Immediately started crying. Damn, I almost tapped into that. All right, we're
Yeah.
good. Um,
No, it's so true though. It's like no one, I feel like, unless you've gone through something like this, you people don't understand the little things that don't necessarily have meaning but were just around at that time. Like I think about that, makes me think of when my dad was like, he was in the ICU for a week before he passed away, and I remember like as we were sort of saying goodbyes and know he was going to die, that Holly Jolly Christmas by Michael Bublé was like on the thing. And I'm just like, of all fucking songs, but I used to love the Michael Bublé Christmas album. And
yeah,
now I'm just like, I can't really, like, I can do some songs, but if I hear Holly Jolly Christmas, I'm like, I
don't deal
can't.
with
It
game
takes me
over.
back. I'm like, I can't do it. So
Yeah,
it totally makes sense. It's like the stuff that, like you, even the things you try to use as distractions almost, like you were saying, the Spider-Man movie. It's just like, I can't do this now
yeah.
anymore.
But I mean, and it was interesting because so at some point I'd AMC A-listers for like the longest time. I was like,
Oh my
I'm
god,
just gonna
shout
watch.
out to AMC A-lister.
Like, as soon as we get a good AMC theater, like in my general area, I'm getting her back because I miss going to the movies. But that it honestly was a way for me to escape what was going
Right.
on because, of course, going through the last few, courses that I had in college, going through like this really weird period of just like nothing happening, um, you know, job hunting and like dealing with even like the mental anguish that is like denials and rejections and like maybe we'll bring you back or maybe we won't.
Right.
I use movies a lot as the escape, and so I remember watching Hereditary actually, and
Yes.
it was such a good movie. But I watched it like in the daytime on my phone, and so like there were a couple of scary like moments in it, but I was like, oh, whatever, like it wasn't even that bad. And so I'm sitting in my room, and Midsummer had just come out,
Mhm.
and I was like, Hereditary wasn't even that scary. Like, I totally have it in me to like watch this movie, and it's like not even like that dark or anything because that's like the whole allure of Midsummer. It's
Yeah,
like
right.
nothing happens like at nighttime. Like all the horror is literally during the day, and I was like, I'll be fine. And probably within the first 10 minutes, I am like getting ready to start sobbing because
Right.
in the first sequence, like the first 10 minutes you are dealing with the main, and I mean, I guess trigger warning. And also, if you haven't watched that movie, don't pause
Spoiler,
me.
yeah, there will be spoilers here.
It's like spoiler alert. Also, that movie has literally been out for like almost 7 years. Get it together.
Exactly. No one can come for us if
Like,
you're mad about spoilers.
but within the first 10 minutes, you have the main character whose sister essentially like is either off her medication or is going through like a manic episode, and she's emailing her sister all these crazy things, and essentially it's just like, you're the reason why, blah blah blah, and I'm gonna do this. And her like boyfriend is like, oh, your sister's just crazy and she's weird and this and that. And Danny, the main character, is just like, no, there's something wrong, like something. And of course, all of these things happen, and it is just so visual, like
Right.
seeing, of course, the car running, the carbon monoxide, all of that, the sister with like the hose taped to her mouth, and the parents just like kind of sleeping peacefully, but you also know that they're not there anymore.
Right.
But seeing like the sister, like, oh my God, I was like, and the really weird part for me when I watch movies, I love watching the front row. So people behind me like can't hear me like as I'm like, oh my God, or like I'm like sobbing, crying,
Uh-huh.
a couple moments, in the theater.
Uh-huh.
But that specifically, like I almost walked out because it was
Yeah.
just so much at like one moment, and it took me a bit to calm down. And then also like the main character is also grieving, and so she's
Right.
like in the next couple of sequences, she's like in her bed, like on the couch, she can't move, she's depressed. I'm like, same, I get that, I feel it.
Totally.
And watching the rest of that movie, you find yourself literally sitting in her like you're just in her shoes, like when she is walking to like the back of the yellow house, and all she can do is just like try to silence her sobbing, and she just like bends over in this like almost standing collapsed moment, and recognizing like I have done that so many times, like in that grieving period, of
Right.
just like, oh, like this is something so funny that my grandma would have loved. Okay, here come the waterworks. Like I'm in the middle of a Smart and Final, or like I don't know, a Vons,
Yeah.
and
It's
I
always the supermarket, always.
always, and I just like, you don't want to alert anybody, you don't want to
Right.
freak anybody out, but it's like when you feel those feelings, you're gonna feel them,
Right.
and so I mean, through the movie, you kind of realize that the boyfriend was an unsupportive shithead. Like, he
Yup.
didn't get it. But then that also just highlighted like the people in your everyday life that haven't dealt with death, that are just like, this isn't really that big of a deal.
Right.
Um, and you're just like, wow, like that dude is a major jackass. And I mean, to be honest, once I got to the end of the movie, I was like, he kind of got his just desserts. Like
Right.
I really think, Danny really like girl bossed her way in there. She's now this Mayflower queen. She's got like this look on her face that's like very concerning, but given everything that she just went through, yeah, you know what? Snaps for her.
Right.
She really
Totally.
she lived through it. But that ended up being my favorite movie, and honestly is still one of my favorite horror movies for the longest time. I had
Yeah.
watched it probably like 4 or 5 different times. And I mean, like the emotion got less and less, and I really got to enjoy the movie for what it really was. But there were still moments throughout the movie, especially when the extended cut came out, where I was like,
Wait, I have not seen the extended cut.
it is absolutely insane. Like this is where some of like they wanted to keep everything like in the light, like during the day. The extended cut is where they have some sequences at night, and that kind of like adds on to the
Oh,
spookiness of it all.
right.
But I mean, for the most part, it is still really highlighting like her grieving process. Some of the other characters, what they're dealing with. It has like a sequence of again her boyfriend being very unsupportive, and like the friend, his like interesting friend that ends up inviting all of them to like go enjoy the festival,
Mhm.
him coming to her comfort. And I mean, it is really interesting, even like touching on that, the amount of people that just come in and go, hey, like we haven't really chatted that much, or there's a lot going on, but you know I'm here for you.
Right.
And I've made a couple of friends out of just grief and grieving,
Yeah,
which was
definitely.
still very strange to me. Or I even strengthened a lot of different bonds from people that also have had to deal with that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
I had a friend of mine who, there had something had happened to her that was an absolute tragedy. But she had no control over the situation. The person just did what they did, and she
Right.
was just in the middle of it. And she would always make jokes about it. And I'd be so scared for her. I'd be like, "Are you okay? Like, do we need to
Right.
like?" I can't be like, I'm not a therapist. I'm literally, I just graduated from marketing school. Um, and finally, of course, once all of that happened to me, I was like, oh, I get you now. Making these
Right.
jokes, the worst, but they get me through.
Exactly. And it's like an easy way almost to talk about it with people. It's like, okay, if I bring up my trauma in a way that is like me doing it lightheartedly, like it's not that I
Yeah.
think about it lighthearted, it's just, okay, I want to talk about it and
Yeah.
let me just do it real quick.
Yeah. It's like, how do I make this really horrible thing that happens to everybody at some point in
Right.
time, but everyone's afraid of it, so palatable that all you can do is laugh genuinely, but
Right.
also be like, I'm a little concerned for you. It's, and so, I mean, and I'll still make jokes about it. Like, I think when I was, cleaning out my grandmother's room while my mom was away, I was like crying, sobbing. And then we like found something in my grandma's where I was like, oh my God, like there's a lot more than I wanted to know about my grandmother. And my friend and I are just like laughing and then immediately start sobbing. And,
Uh-huh.
it's this whole back and forth thing. But, almost just recognizing like the grieving never stops. And so there
Right.
was another movie that I had watched, and mind you, I was so excited for this movie. I was like, oh my gosh, and it's Talk to Me, the A24 movie.
I need to see that still. That's the one that
Oh,
it like came out in the last like year, right?
yes.
Oh my God. Tell me your review on it.
Oh my goodness. Like right now, like I'm not gonna spoil anything for you, but
Yeah.
I'm at least gonna give you the good parts in which
Wait, I think I'm legit gonna watch it tonight
you
because
have.
now hearing your endorsement of it, I'm like, okay, wait,
It
I need
is
to watch it now.
such a good movie. And I mean, mind you, like I
Yeah.
love A24. Like nothing like a good A24 movie and like a beer or a glass of wine, some
Yes.
snacks. But essentially Talk to Me is a movie about this girl that's going through the grieving process after losing her mom. And apparently there is this hand that allows you to talk to spirits. So it's like, talk to me. And then they ended up finding a way to take it a step further and say, well, they will say, talk to me. They'll see the spirit that they're talking with, and like they are probably the most like scary. Like they show how they've died. So like one of them
Right.
like died by drowning, one of them died by a car crash, and so you kind of see like the body as is. Um, and so like all of these like different people, that I probably would assume have not dealt with like death or anything of the sort.
Right.
Um, they're like, it's a game, it's a joke. And to this girl, like once she like does this whole thing, and they have the sickest sequence ever. I mean, I'm assuming you're on TikTok. So like
Mm-hmm.
there's a song, I think Le Monde or something like that. It was like one of the most like popular songs for a hot second.
Yeah.
But they have one of the best visual sequences I've seen in a really long time. And
Ooh.
it's all these people like touching this hand, essentially saying like, I let you in. So it lets the spirit into the body. And everyone's like, you only have 90 seconds before like something really, really bad happens. And, all these different things. But essentially, the main character gets this bright idea to start using this hand to try to communicate with her mom. And of course, one thing leads to another. And she goes past the 90 seconds and crazy stuff starts to happen. But she's getting addicted to this thing because, of course, she's
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm talking to my mom. I'm talking to my mom. Like, she's telling me about all these things. And, of course, it's still a scary movie. Like at least within the first 10 minutes, like one of the spirits that ends up taking over like this teenager's body, like offs the body. Like the body is
Right.
gone. It's done. Um, and I mean, even for me in that moment, like I like had gasped pretty loud, and I had watched it in the comfort of my own apartment. I was like, oh my God, what just happened? And then it's like, talk to me, haha, like
Uh-huh.
going to the movie. Um, but like, I can't tell you how many times I have definitely thought to myself, if there was an ability to have 10 more minutes with my grandma
Right.
and I would have to like give up like a year of my life, like, girl, yeah, let's do it.
Easy, done.
Start the clock, we're
Right.
going. Um, and understanding like what that character has been through, at least in a sense, that is an almost an everyday, every week, every month thought. Like, I really
Right.
wish I could tell my grandmother about this guy that I really liked that ended up like not working out and he like friend
Right.
zoned me. And like, I would really wish I could tell her about like getting my job that I wanted so bad or getting the apartment that I wanted so bad and like showing her, the things that we bonded over. And so, of course, like watching horror movies, almost nothing, like there isn't anything that's like off the table.
Right.
Directors, screenwriters, actors literally put their entire selves out on display in some of the most rawest, most uncomfortable ways. And a lot of people, of course, like it's entertainment, but for some, it is like, no, like that is serious. That's like shit that I've actually gone through.
Right.
Also, am I like allowed to cuss in some of these? Because I'm like,
Oh, yes, please, please do.
I was just thinking about that. I was like, should I be bleeping myself out? Um,
No, no worries there.
but I mean, from at least from that moment,
Hmm.
I'll like kind of bring it back a little bit, especially through COVID. I was watching a lot of scary movies. I was watching, The Invisible Man as a thriller. I was watching all these different things like as a means to escape, not recognizing that the escape was actually just leading me straight like head first into the issue.
Right.
But I was like, well, this feels comforting at least. Like I'm not the only one that's dealing with this in this capacity.
Yeah. I love that. I love that you say that because I was going to ask you what it was specifically about scary movies for your grief, and I think you touched on something that really like put it in a great word in what I use it for, which is that feeling escape, but it's also that feeling of, cuz not every form of like not every genre explores grief in the way that scary movies do.
Yeah.
And I think even if it's much more horrible or it's like the deep like the worst parts of what you've gone through, it's like they're not afraid to go there.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's huge. I feel like it makes
Oh
sense
yeah.
why we're so like connected to scary movies. It's like, oh, I can really explore this without judgment or fear because the fear is all just laid out there for you.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like when it comes to death, like that is probably the worst thing that could happen to you. That's the most
Right.
permanent thing that could happen to you. You don't come back from that. And at that point, you've dealing with death, or at least understanding that initial sequence or process of death, you've already dealt with one of the scariest things you could ever deal with. So like the boogeyman, the the exorcist, like all these different like, yes, it is psychologically scary, but at the
Mhm.
end of the day, the scariest thing is death. Like
Right.
if you can at least get through that and be able to compartmentalize and process that in a way that makes the most sense to you, anything else that follows is just like, yeah, this is scary, but I kind of know something that's a little bit scarier that I don't even want to think about or talk about
Uh-huh.
ever. And so I mean, like there are so many. I'll tell my friends or like tell people that I'm like meeting up with, like, hey, like let's watch a scary movie. And they're like, I can't do scary movies. I can't do that. And I'm like, girl, grow up hair. Like, come on. But then, like, of course, to them, they're like, no, that's like the scariest thing. I literally won't go to bed. I'm like, what if you actually couldn't go to bed because death?
Right,
Like,
exactly.
it is again really interesting because of course, when you think of rom-coms, like there are things that you cannot bring up in a rom-com.
Mhm.
When you think of sci-fi, there are certain things you can't bring up in a sci-fi. When you think of animated movies, like, oh, there's certain things that you can like kind of get away with, but like it's pretty much still geared towards like younger audiences, families, kids. There are only so many things that you can get away with. And I mean, while not a scary movie like Soul, I was sobbing. Like it hit
Yes,
my
Soul
heart
is so
so
good.
bad.
But I got annoyed with the ending of Soul. I got so pissed off because I'm like, the whole thing is about this acceptance of life and death and everything. And then the ending is like, you're good. You can live.
Yeah,
And
it's like
I'm like, oh, let's kill him off. Let's make him die. Let's
like
explore that. Like,
you can actually have a second chance. It's that's not actually something that happens, but what if we brought you back for like a round two, a cute little round two? You know, and I'm like, I'm watching this movie, I'm like sobbing in the living room. And I know my mom had to be like looking over, like, girl, what is going on? This is a Pixar movie. You do not need to be crying like that. Um, but you know, for that, and I felt really weird crying about it, but there were certain like tones and messages that made me think of my grandma where, you know, I was like,
right.
yeah, like, you know, she did a lot of like sewing and fashion and all of that. And a way that we connected was through that. So like I have all of her old like machines, embroidery machines, her sewing machine. Like I've created all these different things from it. And so watching Soul, even though not a scary movie, it was like you need to live your life like it's your last. Like, and
Right.
technically it is, but you know, even thinking about that and bringing that into like grief. So Pixar, I have some strong words from you first and foremost. And no, I will not be
I
watching Inside Out too, because
agree.
that's just gonna make me feel some sort of way.
Oh yeah, I know. I'm trying to decide if I'm going to see that. But no, it's so true. Like I think about I had written this article about Never Have I Ever, like, and it got published and everything, and like I hope they're not listening, but the editor had sort of changed the ending to be like this tie with a perfect bow ending.
Mhm.
And I had changed it back to what it was before, and then they changed it again, and that's what got published, which fine, whatever, that's their like editorial standards,
Yeah.
fine. But I think for the longest time that really bothered me, and it still bothers me because I don't think death and loss can be tied with this perfect bow. Like,
Yeah.
I think we should be able to be like, holy shit, this sucks and I fucking miss this person, period. Like,
Yeah.
not, but it's okay, or oh, but I'll get better one day. Like, it
Yeah.
sucks and that's it. And I think that's what I love about scary movies, because it doesn't have to have this tie with a bow perfect ending. It's just,
And
oh shit, this sucks.
typically the best ones, like they don't. They end very messy. They end gosh, what was that one? It's the one movie where this woman goes to like this Airbnb and this other guy is like in the Airbnb and she's like, I don't know what's going on, but then there's like this creature that like lives in the basement.
Oh, wait, I
Um,
do not know this one, I don't think.
ugh, I almost have to like look it up really quickly.
Yeah, at first I was thinking, because I just watched The Strangers chapter 1 in theaters, and I was like, oh, Airbnb, I wonder if it's that one. But Airbnbs freak me out because I'm like, oh my god, who's hiding here?
Exactly. And you just like you're like, this is really strange. But and I mean, mind you, like you don't know like what's going on. Like the last time I stayed in the Airbnb, there was like a little door that like went down to like some weird area. And I'm
No.
just like, not only are we in a foreign country, I don't really like I love the people that I'm staying with, like they're my teammates, like, but at the same time, like, I don't know you from Adam. Like
It's like, I don't
you
know you people that well. What is going on
like
here?
we could literally be out at the bars and then you like snap and then we get back and you're just a whole monster like that's actually coming up from that little door that we discovered earlier like but the movie is called the Barbarian.
Ooh, okay.
It's a very freaky movie. It's a good movie.
Yeah.
But even then like that movie also deals with grief in the way that like the main monster like deals with like the loss of a child and like the monster's trying to figure out how to process that grief to the point where like one of the people that ends up like being stuck in the situation like the mom has already like essentially latched on to this person
Right.
and sacrifices herself to save the person. Seeing that movie, I was like, that is not where I expected this to go.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, the ending is like even crazier. Like, that's not like that's not even the end. You still have like another 15, 20 minutes of movie left.
Mm-hmm.
But even seeing grief portrayed in the monster, seeing grief portrayed in like the spirit, the entity, and you're just like, oh, they're so evil, they're so bad, they're so scary. It's like,
Right.
grief is not this happy-go-lucky like puppy that runs around and frolics in a meadow. Like, grief is ugly. Grief
Right.
is like nasty. Um, like I remember, I'm always remembering things vividly, but
Right.
there was a moment where my mom gave me a break during the summer, so she, brought my brother up to hang out, and I just had the house to myself. And I remember I came back from the gym, and the house was empty. There was nothing except my dog, or the family dog that was there. And I just remember I just got into like the fetal position and just like cried my eyes out, and then recognized that my dog was staring at me. And so I had to like clean it up. I was like, this is like, you're a dog, but this is a little embarrassing. But, even recognizing like, it still comes in waves. And like, I'm getting ready to, we're getting ready to hit like 6 years without my grandma. And so it still will hit and come in waves. And, um, even like I would cry every year on my birthday. And I found out just recently why that is. It's because she would always, oh, like, I love birthdays. I want to celebrate you. I want to do things. And we would, watch movies and, eat cake and all like very, very like basic things. But she would always make sure that you were celebrated. And so,
Right.
um, yeah, I remember like this past birthday, like hopped in the shower, like, was a little drunk, whatever, and sobbed. I had
Right.
never cried that hard before. And I think I hadn't like watched any movies like at that point recently. But it just got to a point where I was like, okay, like now I kind of understand, like, literally anything can set me off. It does not matter.
Yeah.
So whether it's an event, whether it's a piece of media, whether it's just a happening that just happens in front of my face, I am still very, raw and vulnerable to a lot of those things. Um, and again, like, there's so many different movies that I've watched where I'm like, okay, like I wasn't really expecting this. It's not really what I wanted to experience, but here we
Mhm.
are. Wow.
Right.
Um, yeah. So it just a lot of good stuff, but a lot of crazy stuff for sure.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah, you have no idea. Like, I experience the same. It's like I have no idea what's going to trigger me. Like, actually, this week I was going to release an episode about Father's Day and record it with my husband, and we literally, like, 7 minutes into recording, like, I just started sobbing. I was like, I literally can't do an episode. Like, it's been
Yeah.
10 Father's Days without this will be the 10th one, and still it's just, you never know when that feeling is going to strike, which is why, like, I feel like the like openness about grief is so important. So then it's like when I do have these moments, people don't think I'm a freak and like understand, like,
Right.
no, this is par for the course.
Yeah. Again, it's just, especially as you get further and further away from, that particular time, so many people believe like, oh, you should be able to like be okay with it, or, you should be fine. And it's like, but you're not.
Right.
Like, you're not okay. This person that you want to still talk to, they're gone. And the easiest way that I've been able to explain it to other people is like, think of your house. You can come in and out of the house as much as you like. You can step in the doorway, you can step out of the doorway. You can literally do a cute little like jump back and forth. With life and death, once you step through that door closes shut permanently. There's no way to reopen it. There's
Right.
no amount of voodoo, astrology, like religion that is going to open that door back up. And I think that's what helps people kind of understand in a decent way.
Hmm.
But still, like, there are some people that still don't understand. And you will hit those moments Like I could literally see an old woman hunched over her walker and I'm like choking at like, I'm fighting
Right.
back tears because, you know, my grandma used a walker. But it's just those little things. And people are like, are you like, what's your deal?
Since she passed away, it was your senior year, correct,
Yeah.
of college. Do you find as we're starting to get older and get sort of in our like later 20s, do you find more people now are starting to understand because they've experienced the like losses themselves? I'm curious how sort of talking about grief within like your friend groups have
Yeah.
changed compared to when it first happened versus now.
You know, people definitely start to understand a little bit more. I will say I haven't had a ton of close friends really experience grief,
Right.
at least to that extent. But I did have, you know, one of my closest friends lose her dad.
Mm,
And, you know, she didn't quite, you know, she understood, but she didn't quite understand, you know, when I lost my grandmother until she lost her dad. And she just, I mean, she had a full breakdown. And I was just, I mean, and it was during COVID. There was nothing we could do. You know, we were literally surrounded by death and dying and chaos.
right.
And for her, like that wasn't caused by COVID. So for her, it was just such a shock to the system. And it got to a point where even I didn't know how to help her because in the way that I was grieving, it was enough for me to be like I was able to go, okay, even though this has happened to me, I was able to navigate it in a way that was healthy ish and in a
Right.
way that like made the most sense to me, even without a therapist.
Right.
And for her, she just couldn't quite. And for me, I would have to say, like, side note, like, I have to process things with people, but a lot of the good processing, a lot of the more powerful processing is done alone. I have to be
Mhm.
by myself. I have to be journaling. I have to be hiking. I have to like, I can't do it with other people. It does not work.
Right.
And so for her, she was, you know, consistently leaning on us. And I'm just like, I can't process that grief for you.
Yeah.
In the same
Right.
way that you couldn't process my grief, I can't process yours. And so, you know, it's been a few years even since then, and she's gotten a lot better. You know, there are a
Mhm.
lot of definitely rocky moments, definitely a lot of words exchanged between our friend group, where, you know, another friend of mine, she lost both of her parents
Mhm.
within a very short period of time. And, you know, she had talked to our mutual friend, and the mutual friend was like, well, you've lost both your parents, so you should know exactly how this feels. And the girl is just like, "Are you? What are you talking about? Like,
Right.
are you serious?" And like, I mean, the rest of the group, like the group chat, just went silent for the like probably like 2 full days because we were like, "What just happened?" And is like, if I go to bed and wake up, do these text messages still exist? Like that was, man, COVID was a time, but that was a moment, a very pivotal moment where um, we recognized that the way that we process grief is extremely different. And I mean, my
Mhm.
friend, although like enjoys watching movies and shows and things like that, like I don't think took the route of watching like scary movies and like
Right.
other forms of media like to help her grieve. A lot of it was just like I just need to escape, but that escape is not helping me process what's going on. Whereas like my friend that had lost both of her parents, like she plays Dead by Daylight, she
Mhm.
like scary games, scary movies, like if she can go to like a scary haunted house, like she'll do it. Uh,
Wait, love her. I feel like I want to be friends with her.
Honestly, I think y'all actually would be really good friends. She also lives, she lived in San Diego.
Yeah.
And you know, she you know, when we talked about everything that was going on, because at that point we all were pretty good friends, you know,
Mhm.
there were so many times where like they all reached out in their own way. And I would say the people, of course, that had experienced that grief already were the most impactful. You know, as I
Mhm.
kind of said earlier, But, regardless of who exactly you've lost, as long as it's like they're remotely close, that's where we could bond and really talk about what was going on. And,
Right.
we could really like make fun of each other. Like, she's like, oh, yeah, like I'm an orphan. I don't care. And we'd be like, girl,
Right.
what? It's horrible. And she's like, that's the way I cope. If you don't like it, then you can kiss 10 years of friendship goodbye because you know me well. But things like that, you just kind of recognize, and especially as people get older, as our parents get older, as our pets get older, like, I mean, I'm not going to pretend like a pet and a person are like the same,
Right.
but there are still moments where, like, I know our family dog, when it's time, I'm going to have a meltdown because he was our first
Right.
dog and he was the dog that my grandma chose. So it's just
Exactly.
like anything that goes that she has had a hand in is almost like a little piece of her is also like kind of going away. And
Totally. It's that compounded grief. It's like
yeah,
if I lost whoever and then like I start to lose more and more of pieces of life or things or whatever that they touched, it's harder than just as someone losing a dog and that's their first loss. It
yeah.
is. It's just if you've lost someone who, yeah, it's so true. No, that totally makes sense.
So and I mean, it's not like we're like counting down the days or anything, but we do
Right.
recognize like when these things happen, um, when we have to give this away or when this stops working, even though it's not a living thing in our brains, it was connected to someone who was living,
Right.
and now we got to get rid of it. It's so interesting. And honestly, I want to see, I think a lot of studios, especially, took a break creating like grieving movies because of
Mhm.
COVID.
Right.
You didn't see a lot of media or TV shows or movies talking about pandemics until like that taboo period was like kind of over, but not really over because COVID really never ended.
Uh-huh.
But seeing like LA Fire 911, something like that.
Right.
They talked about COVID, and you're just like, okay, like I want to see more of that because there are so many people where COVID is their first like run in with death. So many of at least my former friends and colleagues dealing with death because of COVID, where they're like, oh, I had plenty of years with this person. And it's like, you actually don't.
Right.
And I know there's a lot of people like still sitting in that grief, especially as we are going out and about doing things, going clubbing. Like, and don't get me wrong, like people should be able to enjoy that and do that, as long as they're all like vaxxed and maxed or whatever. But to some people, they're like, how could you? Like, I'm like, this thing is still happening and
Right.
people are still dying and like we're nothing's happening. Like people aren't trying to like people are just writing it off like, oh well, like Vanessa and Hudgens said, well,
Oh my god, people are gonna
people
die,
are gonna die. Like,
which is horrible but inevitable.
yeah. Just like, and mind you, like, although extremely horrible, like kind of queen level status, like she really was like, and
Also, this is so specific, but I wonder if that was at all informed because her dad has passed away at that point that she said that. I'm like, I wonder if her sort of like talking about that, no excuse for it, because obviously that was a wild thing to say. But
yeah.
I'm like, that phrasing was so informed by her own experiences with grief.
Oh
I'm like,
yeah.
that's interesting too.
Like I think for a lot of people seeing that, they saw it as like, oh my,
Mhm.
like you were being so inconsiderate of the people that are like freshly losing their, and it's like, no, when you've dealt with that already,
Right.
that just kind of comes out, and it's
Right.
not like you are like any less sad or any less, sincere, but like at that point, you've already experienced the worst thing you could experience as a
Right.
living being. There's at that point, like, yeah, like it's gonna feel really nonchalant and very just there. And for others, it's like,
Totally.
oh my God, like how dare you say that? But it's
Right.
like,
Exactly.
no, like that's what's going on. So I want to see more movies, more media really get into like, not necessarily like, oh, there's a scary, spooky entity, or I think there are a lot of different movies that are coming out that are like based on old movies, like the
Hmm.
origins of the strangers, which mind you, I'm not watching that
Right.
movie. That feels too real. If I literally,
Wait, which is the origin? Is that the Strangers chapter 1? Is that the one
yes,
that I Okay, that I watched that and we were alone in the theater and it was very, very
no,
scary.
nope, 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 nope. I have like this fear if I look out my window and I see someone, because I live across from a field, and if I see
Right.
someone standing out in
Oh,
the middle of that field and then they point to me as I'm looking, because you can't see me from the field, you can't see my body, I can see you, but you can't see me. If I see someone
oh,
pointing directly at me,
living next to anything open. I'm like, I need to be cozy in my apartment complex or I simply can't exist.
exactly. The moment I see that person pointing and then dashing towards my apartment, it's a done deal. I don't know what I'm going to do. Like those are the kinds of the movies like I can't be like I have
Right.
no, even if I had a partner watching with me, I'd be like, yeah, no, because if you have to go back to your apartment or if we're not having a cute little sleepover for the next month and a half, it's we're not doing that. But we've seen a lot of movies like that, come through the pipeline. I want to see more movies that allow people to actually grieve and like
Right.
really connect in a way that makes the most sense. There are just, a lot of like, oh, we're in the middle of war and like that's scary. And it's like, of course it's scary. That feels a little too like let's we literally have like millions of people that have dealt with this pandemic, that have dealt with
Mm,
death. let's kind of let's bring that in a little bit. Let's
right.
really process what that feels like, and let's do it through some form of media. Like,
Right.
yes, let's all get therapists, mental health is good, like, you know, protecting ourselves and getting the professional help that we need, always amazing, snaps, claps. But for the stubborn people that refuse to see a therapist and just want
Right.
to, read books, listen to music, watch movies, let's make it a little bit easier for them to also process and understand.
Definitely.
Because without that, then we're having people that are just sitting with it, and then they don't find healthy ways, and then they become Vanessa Ann Hudgens, but they also just like they say it even worse than she did, and then they get blown up on the internet. Yeah, that's kind of what I want to see Hollywood move towards, even though
Definitely.
it's probably not going to happen.
Totally.
But,
Well, this has been so wonderful. But before we wrap up, I want to ask you if you had to tell someone who wants to like either dive into horror or hasn't watched a lot of it and wants to use it as a way to look at grief, like what maybe 3 movies would you say would you suggest to someone? Because I have an immediate like ones that I want to say, and you can also steal from me if you agree with those. But I like the Mike Flanagan shows, like the Haunting of Hill House, Haunting of
oh,
Bly Manor. Especially my
so
personal
good.
favorite was Midnight. It's either called,
Yes,
oh fuck, it's
I
either
know what you're
Midnight
talking
Hour or
about.
Midnight Club. It's not
Midnight
the
Club.
mass one. It's the okay, yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes. Midnight Club. I would recommend those because I feel like every single person on those shows, grief has touched them in some capacity,
yes,
and it explores like all the different ways that every single person, like, I don't know,
yes.
processes it. So that would be my rec.
Oh my goodness. Yes. The Midnight Club. There. Oh my gosh. I'm not going to get into that, but a great series, great piece of media.
Yes.
Definitely talk to me. Like that is still such a good movie that I think about often. Like aside from what it looks like, just the processing, the actual like content is just so good. Um, Trying to think honestly, like yeah, the Haunting of Bly Manor was like
It was so good.
that one was so I think I recommended it to a friend because of the situation that one of the characters gets into, that
Right.
she directly dealt with. And I was like,
Right.
this is a really good one to watch. Um, there's a huge trigger warning. If you have not processed completely that particular situation that happens to one
Right.
of the big main characters, uh, consider maybe not watching it, but if you feel the pain, you
Right.
can. But yeah, I would have to say at least those two series and then Talk to Me. I love Midsummer. I think it's great, but I do think there are better pieces of media that really
Right.
shine through. So,
Definitely. Oh my gosh, this was such a wonderful episode. Literally, thank you so, so much. I'm so glad we've been connected on
yeah.
Instagram
Oh my
and
goodness.
everywhere and we could have this conversation.
It was fun. Like I said, I think, a lot of people don't get a chance to really talk about grief in a way that, makes a lot of sense. And so when someone provides the opportunity to be like, hey, like, actually, let's talk about this in a way that's like actually kind of healthy and like, non-judgmental, you're like, I'm jumping on that opportunity very quickly. So yeah, no, thank you for doing this. Like I said, I love what you're doing. I love the blog. I love your writing. It's
Thank
just
you.
so like heart-wrenching but heartwarming and just brings everything together. So definitely appreciate
Oh my
what you do.
gosh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to Grief and Media. If you liked this episode, please rate and review. Check out our media database, newsletter, essays, and more at griefandmedia.com. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Grief and Media. Okay, thank you so much for listening. Love you all. I'll see you next time.